Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation with the Vietnam War filmmakers, Ken Burns and Lynn Novick. Ken, I want to pick up on what Lynn was saying about the two sides in this film.
I think the reconciliation is possible within our two countries, where we're both divided, as well as between the two countries, where we seem to have at least superficially solved the distance between us. And we had a North Vietnamese soldier that we interviewed who had come actually to New Hampshire, where we were editing, and made some comments. We put him into the film, and he had a chance recently when Lynn took the film back to Vietnam to look at it. And he said, you know, when I was in the Army through the propaganda, I saw the demonstrations that were taking place against the war in the United States as a sign of our weakness as a country and their superiority, because they had a kind of monolithic sense of morale and purpose. But he said, I realize now that that was a sign of your strength, that he didn't have that luxury of being able to say, you know what, I disagree, without ending up in a re-education camp or worse. And I think for us Americans who are still torn on the bias about Vietnam, to realize that from the distance of our enemy, they can actually now appreciate all of the things that were going on with us, might help us all heal.
Right. Lynn, let me ask you about the American presidency and this war. You so beautifully chart the many presidents of both parties who were a part of this. What was the state of the American presidency through the Vietnam War?
We think that you can really see a sea change between when the war began, or when America got involved in Vietnam, which is right after World War II, and that was the Truman administration, the Eisenhower administration, then Richard Johnson, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, that, you know, there was a sense that we believed in our leaders, that they were good people, that they knew what they were doing, that they were competent, that they would do what was in the best interest of the nation, that they would not lie to the people, that they would tell the truth, you know, and that they would sort of carry on the nation's business in the best possible way. And that just eroded and eroded and eroded. You had sort of a credibility gap where the public began to doubt that they were getting the true story under Johnson. And it sort of metastasized into terrible cynicism under Nixon, that we cannot trust our presidents, that they don't tell us the truth, that they are not doing the right thing, and that, you know, just sort of a pox on both their houses. Right. And that's sort of where we are now. It's become sort of from naive idealist sort of faith to skepticism to cynicism. And that's a disturbing thing. And you hear this in the audio tapes that we were able to include in the film, where you hear our presidents speaking privately, especially Johnson and Nixon, about what they really think about the war, which is they have terrible doubts, they have no confidence, they want to get out, they don't see the point, and they go out on television the next day and say everything's going great.
Ken, it's about a decision that becomes, in a sense, irrevocable and has its own momentum.
It does.
Give me your sense of that, and also as a filmmaker, how do you take those of us who weren't living in that moment back to it? Because now Vietnam, it connotes failure for people. Like, how did they not know this was going to be a disaster? How do you convey that to people?
Well, you know what? Good storytelling, someone once told me, is and then, and then, and then. And so you just start at the beginning and you ask certain questions of the Truman administration, and they're making decisions based on domestic political considerations, which is a polite way, you know, of saying, will I get reelected? And Eisenhower and Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon. What's interesting for us filmmakers, and maybe it's too much inside baseball, is that we're trying to sort of manage a combination of a bottom-up and a top-down way of communicating history. So-called ordinary folks at the granular level of combat, as you saw in that first clip. But then also we've got the president sort of supposedly top-down, 30,000 feet, with our best interests. And here you're hearing in the intimacy of the tapes, particularly the Johnson and Nixon tapes, the exact opposite, not only of what they're saying, but it explodes this notion of the great men and returns them to the same very human level as everyone else we're dealing with. So you're perceiving this momentum that all of them know exactly that this is not going to work out, that as, you know, we have a strategy of not losing rather than winning, or any articulation of particular goals that would represent winning. And then they're also saying one thing in public and another in private, but you can get at their humanity and their failures. At the same time, our ordinary witnesses are betraying the same sorts of complications. John Musgrave, you know, I hated them and I feared them at the same time.
Right. Lynn, what was it like to have the Vietnam and your war in your head for this length of time?
Well, I think it's true for Ken and me and our writer Jeff Ford, our producer Sarah Botstein. None of us got a whole lot of sleep over the course of this. It was a 24/7 obsession. And it was devastating. I mean, it was devastating and it was deeply inspiring. It was devastating to think of the lives lost, American 58,000 lives, Vietnamese 3 million lives, 300,000 are still missing in Vietnam. So to try to absorb the meaning of that was totally devastating. Every time we go to the wall, we cry. Every time we think about what happened in Vietnam, we cry. And yet we were also just deeply moved and sort of inspired by the courage of the people who shared their stories with us. You know, that they sort of summoned the inner resources to speak about things that were deeply troubling, and to see them living and breathing and, you know, able to function and tell us what happened to them. People who lost a son, people who lost a friend, people who were wounded horribly. Just, they survived, and here they are, and that's incredible.
How did they do that? I mean, they're so calm in these descriptions.
What you want to do is try to go in and listen. I mean, too often now, in a kind of journalistic dynamic, you've got a set of questions. You're not, it isn't really listening, because what we want to do is hear something in a tick of the voice or a twitch of a cheek, and don't have just a couple of minutes. We have, you know, an hour or 2 hours to sit with them and to hear that question number 7 may in fact have a B, C, D, E, F, G thing, and suddenly you're down a wormhole that we, and more importantly they, weren't completely sure they were going to go to. And so there is nothing more satisfying professionally than to be witness to sort of express memory for the first time. And some of these people had stories, I won't say practiced ever, it's impossible in the Vietnam War to have this practice, but some of them, I think, surprised themselves by the way the moment, the memory overtook them. And it's said that, you know, you fight wars twice, once on the battlefield and once in memory. And if you've got your camera there and you're sensitive to it, you can sometimes see the conflict, and it's not always between armies, it's within a particular person. And that kind of growth and that kind of development is something you want to capture too. And so many of the 79 people you meet on camera in the film undergo profound psychological and emotional changes as a result of this war, and thankfully, gratefully, they were willing to share that transformation with us.
Lynn, what surprised you the most in the process?
Well, I was devastated to find the sense that our leadership never really had confidence that the war could be won from the very beginning, and to think about all the lives lost and all the terrible suffering that people went through both here and in Vietnam. And I think I didn't expect that. I thought there would have been some moments along the way. And I think understanding how deeply complicated the war still is in Vietnam, you know, they won, the Vietnamese government and the Vietnamese people that are on the winning side are now to this day reckoning with the losses they suffered and asking questions about what it means, some of the same questions we ask, and that surprised us. We really didn't know that there would be this sense of, was it worth it? What price did we pay? Were our leaders doing the right thing? The same questions we ask, they're asking in Vietnam, and that was revelatory for sure.
All right, we're gonna have to leave it there. Thank you both so very much. It's an amazing piece of work. And tonight, it will air on PBS at 8 p.m. Eastern, The Vietnam War, and we'll be right back.